Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the Tree Surgeons podcast. So today, this episode is going to be me talking around why we've launched this podcast, what our intentions are for the future of the podcast, and then just a little bit of a backstory about me and my time in the industry over the last 20 years. So why the Tree Surgeons podcast? Some of you may know me, some of you may not, but I've been running a podcast for the last 2.5 years called Fail Forward, which is all about my experience and thoughts around one of my biggest failures, tree surgery business going under back in May 2019. I've shared everything from the good and the bad over the last couple of years, but what I wanted to do moving forward was give a bigger impact in the tree surgery arboricultural industry. So that's where the Tree Surgeons podcast comes into play. If you've listened to my old podcast, thank you. It did get to #1 in entrepreneurship. But if you don't know me, in that podcast, I did a lot of solo episodes, probably about 75% solo episodes. And then 25% I was interviewing other entrepreneurs, business owners, and different people that have had an impact on my life over the past few years. What's going to be slightly different with the Tree Surgeons podcast is we're going to be doing more interviews with people within the industry. So it's all going to be around the ARB industry, tree surgeons, forestry, all around that industry, maybe a bit of landscapers too, but we're going to be specifically focusing on ARB firms, ARB industry, everything to do with tree surgeons, basically. And a lot of it is going to be probably more 75% me interviewing, 25% there'll be a few solo episodes. But I think I've done a lot of those solo episodes now. So if you want to listen to more about my story, there's still the Fail Forward podcast is live and on YouTube and other places. So there's a lot of solo content within there. But moving forward, it's going to be a lot more of me interviewing other people. So today I'm going to spend some time talking around my journey, my story, the things I've done badly and the things I've done well in this industry. As you've probably seen me in the past, I share warts and all, everything. I think that, and I know that a lot of the learning happens when shit goes wrong. And I'm quite happy and open to share as much of my experience as I possibly can. I wear my heart on my sleeve, so happy to just continually share the good and the bad of what I've been through in the last 20 years of being in this industry. So let me start by telling you a little bit about me and how we've come about to get to this podcast. So I was born in East Anglia in a place called Ipswich and grew up in a town called Bury St Edmunds. And then my parents moved me after my dad had a heart attack, luckily still alive now, but had a triple heart bypass. They decided to move down south because my dad was into the water, like being around water. And the Solent is one of the best places to be for that. So we moved to a little village called Hythe on the side of the New Forest, where I went to school and ended up failing all my GCSEs. And off the back of that, at the school prom, I got the most likely to go to jail award. I'm very proud to say that I haven't ended up going to jail, but you can imagine how unhappy my mother was when I got that most likely to go to jail award. So let's just say academia, school just didn't really work out for me. And I'm now currently exploring whether I'm ADHD or not, because looking back, there is a lot of telltale signs that maybe I wasn't quite fit in at school, which I'm sure a lot of people, because I know a lot of people in this industry can probably relate to that maybe English and maths and different things like that maybe weren't our strongest subjects, hence why we ended up doing a very physical and active job like tree surgery. So after I failed my GCSEs, my dad gave me some advice, and that was, look son, don't worry about that. School doesn't mean anything. Go and make sure you work hard, you're committed, and you never give up. Oh, and by the way, make sure you start a business as young as you can. My dad's always been a one-man band business. He's ran restaurants, hotels. He did a meat round going from Smithfield Market, fixed people's boats, but always been a kind of a man in a van kind of guy. So he didn't start his business till his mid-30s. So he always told me to start a business as young as you can. What I actually did when I left school is I went and did some customer service stuff, worked for a power tool company, then Barclays Bank, then did some recruitment, did some other sales stuff, did some other customer service related jobs. And I spent weeks, not months, staring out the window thinking, I don't want to fucking be in this office. Like, I didn't really enjoy school. And now I'm wearing a suit to work every day. And this is shit. So I ended up going and working with my dad's friend who was a builder to try and be a carpenter. And my dad's friend phoned my dad up and said, look, your son's great, but he really doesn't have the attention to detail for being a chippy. So I think maybe a different trade for him. And actually at that time, one of my best friends from school, Toby Brantford, who is an absolutely ace mustard climber in this industry, he's been doing it 20 years, he's 40 years old, and he's still better than most climbers, young climbers than I've ever seen. He is absolutely mustard. But anyway, at the time, he was just working for Chris Orr Tree Services, and he phoned me up and said, look, Henry, we've got some jobs. working here. Do you want to come and do that? So Chris had the SSE contract and we went and worked, and Chris trained me up, put me through some of my tickets. And we did that, I think, for about a year and a half until Toby moved up to London and worked for a company called City Suburban and said, Henry, why don't you come up here and work for City Suburban? And I was still quite a young climber then. So I went up to City Suburban and realized that I certainly wasn't any sort of level of climber they had. The great thing about that company is they attracted a lot of international climbers. So there were some amazing climbers to learn off in that company. And I started to learn all the different tricks and different things, using things like cambion savers and throw lines and, SRT and stuff like that just wasn't about back then. But people were always innovating and trying to move forward, and especially the Aussies and the Kiwis. They were all over their gadgets. I remember them pulling stuff out their bags and just thinking, wow, there's gadget after gadget. And I just used to a harness strop, one rope with two prussaks kind of person. I've been doing it 18 months and suddenly seeing all these different pulleys and different sort of prusik types and all this kind of stuff was amazing. And it really opened my eyes to what was possible. But unfortunately, I realized when I worked in London that I'm not a city boy, even though we used to like going out clubbing and all that kind of stuff in London, that I really missed being at home. So me and my wife, Sarah, she wasn't my wife at the time, she was my girlfriend. We moved back after being in London for 6 months. I then went and worked for another utility contractor. I worked for a couple of different companies. We actually worked for a company called Landskill, and a lot of people called them Landfill because they actually went under eventually. And they went under in sometime around spring 2008. And all the time I'd been working away, I'd told everybody that I wanted to start my own business. I think I've been doing it about 4 years. And I just told everybody I wanted to start my own business. So anyway, the company goes under. Back then in 2008, there was a lot of tree surgeons and not many jobs, which is the complete opposite to how it was now. There was like me back then trying to apply for work, like they wanted you to have every single ticket, and the selection process was very, very different to how it is now. I think generally now, if you've got a CS30 and you breathe, you get a job in this industry because there's not enough tree surgeons, where it was very, very different back in 2008. So I had a month or two where I didn't have work after Landskill went under. She went and worked for SSE Direct because there wasn't many other jobs. So we went and worked for SSE Direct. And at that time, working for SSE, I had a phone call from a guy called John Parrington, who's an absolute legend. He'd been in the industry 40, 50 years. I don't know the amount of years, but he's been around a long time. And John was a client of Landskill's. And John phoned me up and said, do you remember, Henry, when you said to me you want to start your own business? I might have an opportunity for you because since Landskill have gone under, we don't have anyone to do our tree work. So do you want to come and meet me in the Checkers pub in Four Marks, which unfortunately is not there anymore, like a lot of pubs. And I went and sat and met John, and John said, look, I want you to start your own business and I'll subcontract you work. And I was like, brilliant. Okay, cool. He was like, but you're going to need a van and chipper. And at this point, I was 24 years old without a penny to my name. I had the most terrible credit rating you could imagine. So I didn't have access to funds. I've never been given anything. I've never been handed down lots of money. My dad's businesses never made huge chunks of money. So I've not come from wealth or anything like that. So I said to John, I'd love this opportunity, but I don't have any way of buying a van and chipper. And this is where John was an absolute legend. So what John actually ended up doing for me was doing the finance through his business, and I paid him back. And we bought a red transit van and I bought a red TP 150, which was from Redwood Global in Borden at the time, which was a Jensen dealer, which, as you all know now, is forced. So from what I've seen those guys do from where they are now, it's been an exceptional rise in the last 16 years in this industry. So I bought my TP 150 and my Red Rocket transit van, as we called it, and we went and subcontracted work. We went subcontracted to John, and trying to pick up our own domestic work at the same time. And John, this was September 2008. I had no clue about economy, recessions, and all that kind of stuff. And if you guys remember, back in 2008, we had one of the biggest recessions ever when the global banking crash happened, when Northern Rock went under. Everyone was over leveraged with like 110, 120% mortgages. People were in negative equity, and then the economy crashed. Fortunately, we managed to survive and get through because we had very low overheads, and we lived in a bedsit. Me and my wife, she worked in a full-time job at NatWest. We were paying £80 or £85 a week, all bills included, so 40 quid each a week. So we could basically live on a shoestring being 24 years old. I just needed enough money to go to a couple of festivals a year, go out and have fun with my mates, and I was all good. So we had about a year of just sort of doing some weeks it'd be 5 days, other weeks it would be a day or two. And we managed to get by. John still fed us a bit of work, but he didn't have the same quantity, just like kind of like this year. We've been going through a recession this year, and it's been the quietest, I think, since that 2008 in the industry that I've ever known it. Now that the COVID money has been spent, the bubbles burst, the staycation boom is over, people are spending less time in their gardens. And it's similar to, if you've been feeling the pinch this year, that's similar to where it was back in 2008. So it wasn't a good place. I've had lots of people troll me and say it was easy when I started. Look back and think it definitely wasn't, because we were in the middle of a recession, so it wasn't easy. But the fortunate thing is my overheads were very low. Our yard was a garage around the back of our masonette, which was £57 a month. And that was it. That was our yard. We didn't have to pay rates or anything like that. So we could live on a shoestring. I think one of the things, if I knew now what I know now, is I think I undercharged then for quite a long time. And if anyone's listening to this and they're starting out, don't undercharge yourself. Yes, you need to get a client base. You might need to go a bit keen occasionally, but don't undercharge yourself, because when you're trying to grow a business, you need cash. Every time you take on another team, you need cash. Anyway, I'm getting a bit sidetracked. So the business, after a couple of years, started to grow. And 3 years later, in 2011, me and my wife, Sarah, got married. And after we got married, you suddenly start to think, because I didn't really know what I wanted from the business back then. I just wanted to earn some money, and I knew I wanted to start my own business. The advice that my dad gave me, there was one piece of bit that was missing from that advice, which I'll talk about later. And so we get married. I suddenly realized that I want to get a mortgage, I want to have kids and all that kind of stuff. And I'm going to need some more money. So we're going to have to grow the business. And being around SSE and knowing a few people in there, we started to look into trying to get onto the network. And we ended up taking a small loan of £10,000 to be able to buy a 4x4 and be able to, I think we had to get Achilles, and we had to go through some other accreditations, because again, we didn't have a huge amount of funds. So we borrowed 10 grand, managed to get close to being approved with SSE. And then unfortunately, they stopped taking any contractors on because there was a fatality in Scotland. So we were then scratching our heads. We spent this money, and we ended up going subcontracting for a main contractor. And that's when the business started to grow. It was me, Mike Netley, who is still working for me now, 14 years on. He started as a groundie. So it just shows, if you look after your teams, what you can do. And Mike is my commercial manager, who basically he operates a business for me now. So I don't have to get involved in the day-to-day running. And a guy called Dennis Britton. We had Andrew Murphy, Alec Graves, and I think another groundie who was helping us out. And we had two teams, one doing sort of John's work and a bit of domestic work, and the other one doing powerline work. And that's really where the business started to grow. We then managed to get, after about a year or so, actually get on with SSE, and the business then started to exponentially grow. And that was a really kind of cool time in the business, but also very, very stressful. And over the next 3 years, our business doubled in size up to 1 million revenue every single year. And we were making about 12% net profit. I was actually looking through my figures the other day and all my old accounts, and could see over the 3 years how much we grew from about 150 grand a year revenue all the way up to £1 million revenue with about a 12% net profit. But what I realise now is we were skin all the time, because we were growing from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 teams. Every time you grow a team, get a new team, you're going to have to go and finance a new chipper, finance a new truck, and then you're going to have to buy saws, and you're going to have to get people climbing kits, and you're going to have to put guys through training, especially for utilities. So we were just constantly spending money. We were constantly in growth phase, and that's where, looking back, maybe some time to plateau and be able to fill up the cash reserves, because again, I didn't have access to loads of funds. I've never had a lot of money. So we were just doing it all off our own pure hard work and drive and determination. And back then, I think I was used to wake up, try and hack time as much as I can. I'd wake up at 4:30 in the morning, and then I would go to work, and I'd probably finish at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in the evening. And my release back then was just going and getting hammered every weekend. I'd have a stressful week, because as you guys know, running tree surgery businesses, or if you're in a tree surgery business as a staff member, it's really fucking stressful. So the standard weekend diet was just going and getting absolutely smashed out my face, rolling in at 6 in the morning, which doesn't really do anyone any favors. And that's kind of where my drug addiction actually came from, was the trying to get some sort of stress relief. But now looking back at it, that definitely isn't the best way to be. So the business grew to about 30 staff. And one of the things I loved about the business, the positive things were, is through that time, we grew a great core of a team. We'd go out drinking every Friday. I'd buy everyone beers. Our first Christmas work do was a trip to Fabric nightclub in London, which was absolute carnage, as you could imagine, taking 10 tree surgeons up to Fabric. But we had a lot of fun around there, but it was hard work. And then the business got to a point where our main contract basically got ripped apart overnight, and we were told there isn't going to be much work. And probably my biggest mistake in business is because I knew everybody so well, I cared about people, I knew people's kids' names, pet names, and everything, that when it came to the crunch, what I should have done when that contract was changed is I should have probably laid off 80% of the workforce and then rebuilt again. But there's a couple of things. One, I'm a very positive-minded person, so I thought we'll be all right. We'll trade through this. And two, I didn't have the numbers and the information in front of me to be able to make those logical decisions. So back in 2019, the business had 47 staff. We had financed £500,000 worth of kit. We had a MOG, we had tractor, flail, mulcher, 5 Defender Mupes, which, if by the way, don't ever buy a Defender Mupe. I've had 5 of them, and all of them were just ended up. We had 5 of them, but before we only ever had 3 out running at one time. They were just an absolute headache. I know people in this industry love Defenders, but as a Mupe, they just don't work, in my opinion. People might have a different opinions, but that's my experience. But anyway, we had all this kit finance because we'd had this 5-year contract, but actually it was a framework, and that framework got ripped up after about, I think about a year. I can't remember. It's a bit hazy now. Between 6 months and 18 months, that contract got ripped up. And it went out to retender, and we ended up going subcontracting to the people that want it for less rates than we'd put in it, which seems absolutely mental when I say that out now. And this is one of the biggest challenges I see right now in our industry. There are lots of big companies winning work and then subcontracting it out for next to nothing. I was offered work this year at 195 a day. And I mean, I didn't laugh because I'm not rude, but I wanted to laugh because I thought, who can work these days for 195? Like, I mean, we're paying people like 150 a day on the books. So like there's 45 quid to do something with, to try and put some money towards fuel and tickets and all that kind of stuff. So there's still that crap money being banded around. But anyway, essentially what we tried to do is a Tesco's model, which is more teams, more staff, more output for less margin, but hopefully that collates to a bigger profit, or a profit, which it didn't, because what ended up happening is more staff employing anybody with a pulse and a CS30, and ending up not being in a position where we can run a viable business. And we ended up losing money for months on end. And unfortunately, back in 2019, the business went under. And that really hit me hard. The transaction of a business going under is actually quite straightforward, but the emotional, the guilt, the shame, the stress, all of that just took its toll. And unfortunately, I'd end up relapsing on my drug addiction. I had a newborn baby and a 3-year-old at home. So then there's all the shame and guilt of that. But we restarted the business. Mike and Sophie had been on me for 9 years. She was my office manager. They stayed on. We had to lay most of the guys off. It was a really traumatic and stressful situation. And we went down to about 6 or 7 guys, and we ran 2 teams. And over that time, January 2020 came just before COVID, and I decided to quit alcohol. And I still don't drink now. I've not touched anything. I've been clean for 4 years now, 4.5 years. And it's probably one of the best decisions of my life. I'm not saying you out there have to quit alcohol or drugs or anything like that to have a successful business, because there's lots of successful people out there. But for me, I had a really toxic relationship with drugs and alcohol. So it's just better off for me just to not touch anything and just be me. I have high energy anyway, and that just ends up bringing me down. So 2020, I had a phone, no budget, and LinkedIn, and I just took loads of action. As I say, MSH, make shit happen. I made shit happen, and we ended up building our company back up to 6 teams. And over the last 5 years, since then, we've gone from strength to strength. And over that time, I started the Tree Surgery Mastermind and Business Academy, where we deliver courses. But I'm not going to talk too much about that today, because you've probably seen me plastering it all over Arb Talk and other socials. But the key is when I built that business, the Mastermind business, it was off the back of when my business was failing, I would look for help in the industry and outside the industry. And I just got met with not many people who were offering their services to say, look, this is how you can run a business. This is how you can do sales and marketing. This is how you can do numbers. So what I've created in the Mastermind is a product that I wanted 5, 6, 7 years ago. And I just share all my experience and learnings. But anyway, one of the things that I found that was very advantageous for me back in 2020, even though we don't do a lot of domestic work, is that COVID happened. And actually, COVID was quite good for me. And I appreciate some people lost a lot of people through COVID. So if you did, I'm really sorry about that. But my nan used to say to me, she grew up in London in the war. The reason why I've got such a dodgy surname is because my grandpa was Dutch and he came over and met my nan, and they used to go to dancing clubs and they ended up getting married. And it's the reason why I exist today. And I've got a name, which by the way is Guyben, not Gijben or Gijben or whatever other form it is. It's just Guy and then Ben. Anyway, I'm telling you this because my nan used to say, we had a good war. And I always think, what? You had a good war? Like, it was World War II. Like, how can anyone have a good war? But now I look at COVID, like, I appreciate a lot of people had a bad time through that, but I actually had a good COVID. And we had a good COVID because I'm sure a lot of you experienced this. There was people weren't allowed to go on holiday. We've been given bounce back loans, grants, free money everywhere. So people sat in their gardens and the industry was on steroids for quite a few years, which really helped. The bounce back loan helped me. We were doing invoice financing, and that bounce back loan helped me get out of that invoice financing, which was costing us a fortune. Plus, every tree surgeon was busy, which meant we were busy commercially because everyone was flat out. Plus, there was no cars on the road. Lockdown was in full swing, but we were doing essential health and safety tree work, so we could still go to work. And I remember I actually did some nights about 2 hours away from us, and we were just getting there in no time. So COVID was a good COVID for us, and it worked out really, really well, and it helped me grow my business. But over the last 5 years, I've started 3 different businesses. I've got into property. I've learned a lot. I've spent stupid amount of money on my own self-development, because the one piece of advice that my dad was missing is go and start a business really young, be determined, be committed and never give up, but also go and learn about business. And what happened after I failed my GCSEs is that I decided in my mind, I didn't really consciously decide this, but I decided in my mind that I don't do learning and I don't need it. But actually, one of the good things about this industry is you can learn to be a really good climber, and you can be great climbers. And there's lots of great people, climbers out there running businesses, and great tree surgeons running their businesses. But one bit that's not taught anywhere in any of the colleges or any of the MPTC courses you go on is, look, this is how you climb and fell a tree, but also this is how you run an art business. And that's probably one of the biggest advices I can give you, whether you use my services or not. That's not what I'm doing this podcast for, is to worry about my services. But one thing I'd say is, if you're running a tree surgery business, look to learn the business part of it, because once you marry the two up, you can have a really successful business where you don't have to work, get up at 5 a.m. and finish at 10 at night. Yes, it's still hard work. I'm not saying running a tree surgery business is easy. In fact, I'd go to say it that tree surgery industry is probably one of the most toughest places to run a business. Like, we've got an Airbnb business and it runs itself. I've got one guy and a VA in the Philippines who runs it, and I don't have to get involved in it. Whereas my tree surgery business, it still pulls me back in all the time. It is hard. Kit breaking, stuff going wrong on site, all of the ins and outs, all the people we have to deal with, public, tree officers, accreditations, kit breaking, staff issues. It's relentless. It really is relentless in this industry. There's no getting away from it. So if there's one bit of advice I can give is look to learn the business side of things. So anyway, that's kind of my story. That's kind of a quick version of my story and my time in this industry. So I've been in this industry for 20 years. And the biggest challenges I see right now is there's so much from this summer. You see it on Arb Talk and other places every single day. People are cutting themselves. And most people don't value what they do as a business. They don't value themselves enough, and they think that they need to charge less to be able to win work, when actually we just need to win more work, get more clients, build the pipeline, and charge what we're worth. Like, I think the industry standard should be 400 a man a day, outside of London, that is. And I see people charging half that, if not less. And I just don't know how people can physically afford to run a business on that, because you've got to pay your staff good money. You've got to be able to reinvest in kit. You've got to pay yourself a decent wage. Like, I'm seeing climbers' wages now being offered between 45 and 60,000. There are business owners out there that aren't even earning that much money. So if you're not going to charge what you're worth, you may as well just pack up, not have the stress of having your own business, and go and climb for someone for 50, 60 grand a year, rather than having to run your own business. So I think people are undervaluing themselves, but it's not only the small businesses that are doing that. It's the big, large contractors who are winning contracts for next to nothing and then subbing it out for next to nothing. I'm not going to name names, but there are some big companies who openly tell us that they're underpricing work, or their staff do. They're underpricing work to win it, but they subcontract it all out. So who do you think loses? It's certainly not that big company. It's anybody that takes that rate. Like I was offered 195 a day. Taking that rate is putting the white flag up and saying, I don't really want to pay myself that much and I don't value my business. And I'm quite happy to work for next to nothing. If you're a one-man band, or whether you've got 30 guys on it, £400 a man a day is needed. If you've got 30 guys, you need a management team to be running that business. If you're a one-man band, you're not always going to have the fitness to work on the tools. You're going to need to be able to pay yourself a good amount of money into a pension, because the state pension just won't be worth anything by the time we get there. You're going to need to reinvest in kit, and you're going to want to pay yourself 50, 60, 70, 80,000 a year to make the whole stress of it all worth it. So it's this backwards way of us always underpricing ourselves, which just doesn't work in this industry. So I think that is probably the biggest challenge we face as an industry right now, is getting the general public and other businesses to understand the value of tree services. And it's not our decision to decide how much money people have got in their bank account and whether they can afford it or not. And look, I know there's always going to be people underpricing. There's always going to be the gardeners, the people that aren't really, rogue traders who are in this industry. They're always going to be under the people who will just do it. Oh, I'm a landscaper and I'll just do that on the side. All those kind of situations. Like, let those people take the shit cheap work and then go and fish in a pond where you can find the good work, because there is plenty of it out there. You just got to go and find it. But I would say that's probably the biggest challenge. Whether you're listening to this and you're a business owner or not, it's the biggest challenge we face in our industry, is the constant underpricing. And it's not going to disappear. I don't believe that it's suddenly going to disappear. But the more, as tree surgeons, we can value ourselves. I see the subby world, like so many more subbies now are paying 200, charging 200, 250. Great, you're valuing yourself at a lot more, but the business that you're working for needs to be able to then charge more. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. So I'd say that's the biggest challenge in our industry right now. MEC is coming massively, which is great, and it saves efficiency, back braking. Back in when we first started, we didn't have Avants and things like that. We had one roller chippers, like we had a Bandit chipper that we ended up using on a very wet Blackthorn site, and I never wanted to see that site or chipper ever again. The world has evolved, the industry has evolved so much, but we need to be making sure that we charge enough for it, and we charge enough for ourselves, and we value ourselves as tree surgeons, as business owners, because otherwise we're just going to have this constant lack of staff coming into the industry, because most people these days can go and get paid more in McDonald's than they can be for a tree surgeon. And I get it. A lot of people are in this industry for the love of the job. But there's a lot of people that still just need to be able to earn a living, pay the bills, get a mortgage, all that kind of stuff. So I believe in a rising tide raises all ships. And that's why I wanted to have a bigger impact in this industry. That's why I've created this podcast. That's why I want to put more out there. I appreciate I'm going to put myself in the firing line again. There's going to be lots of people trolling me, but I'm cool with that. I'm cool with that because I've built resilience. Like, running a tree surgery business will build you the most resilience you could ever imagine. 16 years of it now, the resilience is hard. But what I'm going to be doing over the coming weeks, months with this podcast is sharing all my thoughts, all my opinions, and also interviewing lots of other people. I'd love to get the ARB Association onto this podcast. I'd like to get other consultants, other people who offer services into this industry, other business owners. We've got some great people on the mastermind. I'm going to be interviewing about trucks in ARB, about health and safety, about marketing, all sorts of things, because I want to have the biggest impact on this industry, because I love it. I've been part of it for 20 years and I want to see this industry grow from strength to strength. I want to be able to see people to be able to charge what they want, for you people who are working for people to be able to get paid a really good wage. And that's only going to happen is if we come together as an industry rather than being against each other all the time. A rising tide raises all ships. Collaboration over competition. Yes, the competition's always going to be out there, but we can help and support each other to make sure that this industry keeps going from strength to strength and we can all have a good life having a good impact on the environment, on our lives, and on the rest of the country, and if not, the rest of the world, because I'm sure there'll be some international companies listening to this too. So that is it. The first episode of the Tree Surgeons podcast. Thank you all for listening today. I'd love to hear all your feedback. Please subscribe, like, and share, and I'll look forward to speaking here again soon. Oh, and if you'd like to come on the podcast, just drop me a message and we can arrange an interview moving forward. Thanks all for listening today. Take care.